Hello everybody and welcome back. Today we are going to do a little bit more of a deep dive into Helios. So I've seen a whole lot of tutorials on it, but they're all very old and not a lot of them go in depth. So we are going to dive into some of the Helios stuff that you can do, how to set it up, and this series is just going to cover a lot of details that I haven't been able to find online, or they're buried into gigantic videos that you have to watch the entire thing to get anything out of it. So the first one today is nice and simple, how to actually install Helios. So if you Google Helios downloads, you kind of come up to Captain Zine. He's got the most profiles, he's got a lot of stuff, and up at the top is downloads. When you click on download Helios, it takes you over here to the GitHub. I'm not entirely sure whose it is, but it takes you to the GitHub account. You click on the top one and you can download the actual installers. If you really want to compile it, you can, but Helios installers.zip. So there's the Helios installers.zip. You basically just download that. You can download the 32-bit if you really want to. You can do the source code, but we're just going to download the Helios installers, throw it somewhere we can use, open it up, unzip, and this will bring us to our Helios installers. You do need to install both of these, but essentially it's just a MSI. You keep clicking next until you hit next, and when you hit next, it'll start the installation. So once those are installed, there are a couple of things that you actually use. One of them is the Helios Control Center. The other one is the Helios Profile Editor. So the Control Center is how you actually start, turn on, and use profiles. The Helios Profile Editor is actually the one that you use to build your cockpit, essentially, and all the buttons you're looking for. So we're going to launch the Profile Editor. When you open it up, it essentially has all your monitors. It opens monitor 1. I have just a couple of them attached to my system, but if you want to edit monitor 1, 3, 5, let's do monitor 5. You just double click and it opens it up in a new tab. I don't really want to use 1 or 2. We're going to do 3 because this is actually the monitor I'm recording on. And your zoom is over here on the left. You can also control scroll, and that will let you zoom in and zoom out. So a little swag around the editor. Pretty simple, pretty simple. Monitor preview up in the top. Then these are all of your tools. So you're looking for something in the F16. Here are all of your tools. Your fuel flow indicator, oil pressure, nozzle. These are basically all the F16 things. MFD, panels, etc. Today, I'm probably going to end up doing some F18 stuff. There are tons of A10. There are F16, there are F14, there are F16, so a lot of this stuff is either universal between a lot of them, or is still being updated, which is a very nice thing. And if you just want generics, there are panels, potentiometers, push buttons, rockers, the usual, and you can put stuff wherever you want. Then over here with the bindings, we are going to deep dive into this, into how to map things, and this is most of where it is. So when you drop a actual button over here, this is where you map it. This is how you tell it what to do, how to do it, when to do it, and essentially what you want it to do. This is really where you do all your mapping. There are layers, so every button's going to create a new layer. You can show and hide layers in here. That way, if you're editing something below another button, you can hide stuff. And it's just a really simple way to kind of see all your buttons and what their, if you're used to HTML coding, what their Z value is. So who's the highest priority, who is seen first on the top. And then the properties, just it changes depending on what you're editing. But that's really your properties. So you can do things like change the background. You could make something solid, you can put images up, you can do custom stuff like that. So then you have your generic profile, new, open. If you have built a profile or you want to download one of Captain Zine's and remap it, I personally like to make my own stuff from scratch because then I know how it works and why I do something the way I do. Standard save, add interface are physical hardware devices, so things like your actual Thrustmaster HOTAS, your WinWing, your Logitech, any of those are going to be added through here. We will do a add interface in a minute. Reset monitors is essentially a way of, hey, I unplugged something, I replug something in. If you download a profile, you will have to run this. And essentially it says this is what the previous person or what your previous configuration was in. Say we unplug monitor 6. It wants to know if you had something on monitor 6, where should I put it, and what's the scaling. So you can move monitor 1 to any of the monitors. You can move multiple things to the same monitor, so just be wary of that one. I haven't made any changes, so nothing really changed. And then you can do any kind of scaling. So that's really a swag around most of the editor, standard stuff kind of all the way around. You really don't need to dive into a whole lot of things like options, but you can do things like Helios on top if you always want it up, if you want to hide it, stuff like that. These guys are just kind of some trees, some cascading, and these are very dependent on your control. So you can move up and down over here in the layers, you can change its hierarchy, you can change if its axis is top bottom, kind of the justification like you would with text. It's in the center. And you can really dive into those as much as you need to. But to start with, if you look down here, there are inputs and outputs. Input is what comes into your button. By default, you have monitors, so things like from monitor 1, if I've placed a button there, it will show up here. So I can do things like when I hit button 1 on monitor 1, do something to whatever control I have selected. Interfaces are your physical devices, so the keyboard's almost always added by default. Profile is your actual starting, stopping, and resetting of the profile that shows your Helios, all of your Helios buttons. But to start out with, we are going to add an interface, and this has quite a few options on it. ESOS bus, I have no idea what that is. Windwing throttle base plus F18 handle, that's probably what we're going to be adding because that's physically what I use for my throttle. We're going to also want to add the joystick HOTAS Warthog. That's the actual HOTAS joystick. Essentially all of your controls and your physical joysticks and throttles are going to show up here. These guys are actually inputs from the game itself. So if you want to map the MI28, the MI8, the M20, if you want to do Flaming Cliffs, Black Shark, F18, AV8B, just a generic stuff like that, these are actually outputs. When an action happens in-game, it will send it into Helios as an actual input. So this is how you get things like gauge displays, how you link up buttons, how you have both in and an out of DCS instead of just when I hit a button, send it to DCS. This is also how you send it and retrieve it from DCS. So we need to add a couple of things. To start out with, we're going to add the joystick HOTAS. It shows you all your axes, your positions, your buttons. You can hit them and push the buttons, and it will reflect up here. I don't really need to, but we do need to add an additional interface. We're going to add my throttle base. You can see a couple of buttons are in different positions. All my sliders are in interesting places. We're going to add startup panel, and as you can see, it's actually adding it down here as an input, but not an output. So we really want to use these as inputs, and since we are going to be pseudo mocking up an F18 today, we are going to choose the F18. That way we can take data from the sim itself. So this is your DCS stuff. You can have Helios running on a different computer than DCS itself. You have to do some setup inside of DCS to actually broadcast over the network. That way the second computer can listen to your DCS stuff. 127.0.0.1, there's no place like home. That's your local host or your computer itself that this is running on, and you can listen to yourself. DCS will broadcast on 9089. If you want to send this somewhere else, you have to put in the IP address of the computer and basically change, the IP address. That's about it. If you change the port, you do have to change that. And you really don't need any of the other stuff. It just kind of checks if your DCS configuration is up to date. So when you've actually got your profile, when you're just starting, when you've got your joysticks added, it's always a good idea to save it. So we are going to do YouTube test. So now we have a profile. What do we do with it? Alright, we're going to throw a button on there just so we can see. Actually, that's boring. We're going to throw the UFC up here just so we can see when we do something. We're going to save that, and we are going to run the Helios Control Center. That's how we're actually going to get this thing running. bit of information on it, lots of contributors. And when you open it up, your profile will show up here. So I've got the F18 tests right there. There's our YT test profile, and basically just anything in that profile directory is going to show up there. Power on off, this is basically your X button. It will close the program when you click on that, so don't do that. Start will start the profile, stop the profile, reset will reset the profile. Go figure. Hide will actually just hide this guy, and you can click on it down on the bottom to show it again. Preferences, there are a couple of options, up to you guys if you would like to play with them. Start minimize, start at login, kind of the generics, and then a console if you're debugging anything, if you're having any trouble with something, you can use that as well. But we've got our YouTube test. We are going to start it loading the profile. Now when DCS is running, you can click these buttons and this will actually show in the UFC. You can adjust your comm volume, you can adjust your ADF. Wow, that's a click and drag. Interesting. But you can put, there we go. You can interact with all these guys and it will send them into the actual simulator itself. So now we are going to have to build some controls, but we are going to do that in the next video. I'm going to show you guys how to actually map and modify these buttons. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed this quick install video, and you guys can download Helios, start up your own profiles, and start building your own toys. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this video, and we will see you guys in the next episode.